like I'm thick, call me Robin. Been on my shit, not the potty. Sick of staying in, I wanna party. Won't apologize for being me, I'm sorry. You can call me, I think you my type of feast. You know that us thick boys like to eat. Chabella poi, vanilla qui. Turn the heat up, ignite the street, thick boy summer. Tip top form, been in the crib like I just got born. Is that your girl? Tell her hit my phone. She can press record, get a TikTok on. Thick boy summer, thick, 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 thick boy summer. She like I'm thick, thick, thick boy summer, thick, thick boy summer, thick, thick boy summer.
Party and Politics with Tony Vincent. Yeah.
3, 2, 1. All right, everybody, welcome to Party and Politics. I'm your host, Tony Vincent. With me, my guest is Strnad. He is from the Metro Detroit area, but he currently resides in Japan. I do not want to butcher the name of the city, so I'm going to let you do that. And yeah, if you just want to give yourself a little introduction.
Yeah, I'm Sean. I live in Sapporo, Hokkaido, in Japan. And yeah.
Now I'm upset because that's the name of the beer. I thought it was some longer name for some reason.
Yeah, that's the very popular beer here, and yeah, around the world somewhat.
Yeah. So and that's named after the city.
Yeah.
Wow. Is a factory there?
Yeah, it's a beer museum factory.
Wow. See, now I feel well, you gotta feel so you gotta get humbled once in a while, and now I'm humbled. So but the main reason I'm actually having you on here is because recently you did something pretty cool. You made a game for the Switch. Obviously we'll talk about some other things today, but that's a big thing. So I wanted you to bring that up, mention it, and just kind of give me the backstory of how that process started.
Yeah, so there's a game on the Switch called RPG Maker, MV, and it's basically a software that allows you to create a game, an RPG, like a role-playing game. So it gives you all the tools, all the graphics, sprites, the tiles that you need, and then it's basically up to you to like build the game from the ground up. You have to put in all the text, all the gameplay options. I mean, you have like a large set of tools that you can use in terms of audio, in terms of event commands. So every single thing from the start screen to the game mechanics to the exploration, the music, you have to pretty much set that up yourself. So it was a really time-consuming process.
Wow.
But it's not like you have to do any coding. You don't actually have to like know scripting or anything like that. But
you're pretty
challenging.
You're pretty much like given the tools, but it's up to you to really almost every scenario and almost like a movie. Obviously, these games, especially the older games that this is kind of built off of, there is this timeline, right? So you got to kind of create this narrative almost like a storyboard situation.
Totally, yeah. I mean, like if you want to have a scenario, for example, where a character walks into a house, talks to somebody, picks up a book, reads it, then walks out of the house, every single step of the way, you have to input that individual action. So it's a lot of conceptual thinking in terms of like, you have to think how you're going to order the event so that it executes correctly on the screen when the player's playing it. So I can't tell you, man, like I had to replay my game probably 100 times just to work out every single little bug or every flaw.
Holy shit, yeah.
And even now when I play it, like the one that's public and available for people to play, I mean, I'll still find little issues here and there. But at this point, I'm just like, until there's enough people that play and actually care about it, like I'm not going to go back and fix every little thing because it would just be an endless process.
I gotcha. So, and this is what interests me is I don't want to get too away from the game just yet, but like you're one of the first things I thought of when I found out about the game thing is I remember, what was this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, you were making these I mean, I can't imagine the kind of time that went into these videos where you had the little cartoon characters. It kind of was like it was kind of like that, what became like, it was kind of like the 8-bit kind of format, right? It was kind of very similar. And that's the first thing that I thought of. So, because I always wanted to ask you about that. What was more time consuming, making that like from some type of, I mean, you were doing like Windows Movie Maker to every little detail with that, weren't you?
Yes, so that was sometime in the distant future was the
Yeah.
name of that, and you can still find that on YouTube. But it was created using Windows Paint. So every single scene was a different picture in Paint, and then when I would have a character talk, I would just change the mouth to make it look like it's open, and then for Windows Movie Maker, have like individual slides where it would change screens to make it look like the character's talking. So that was a really time consuming process. I was working a night shift job at that time, and basically the entire shift I was just on a computer. So
Yeah.
I was able to use most of that time at work making that. And so it was probably like 6 hours a night during work for, I don't know, a month or a month, 2 months maybe. So I don't know, multiply that. It probably took me hundreds of hours basically. But yeah, that was sort of like kind of scratching a similar itch just in terms of like having this sort of idea for a story and narrative and then trying to create the visuals for it and put together a coherent story. Similar process in terms of making the game,
Yeah.
but the game is more probably challenging just because you're using a set of tools that are a lot more complex and that you don't really have, at least I didn't have any familiarity with prior to using those tools. So I had to kind of get accustomed to using those. Whereas like Windows Paint, I think most of us who have grown up with computers probably are
Yeah.
pretty familiar with that. So.
Yeah, I mean, you had pretty fine detail on a lot of this stuff, but yes, we all can maybe paint a house or something, a little stick
Yeah,
figure.
I mean the graphics weren't like for the Windows Paint project, they weren't super artistically like detailed or anything, but
I mean, I remember seeing it at first, and I was like, I just was like, man, I can't imagine how long that took. I mean, yeah, obviously these things didn't look realistic, but they did.
it was like South Park-esque or something.
Yeah, but I mean, I was pretty impressed by it. I mean, and I think anybody who would see it, just because you're just a regular person, especially at the time. I mean, and again, I don't want to assume things, but at the time, even as much as I think you've always been a creative minded person, doing something like that was your first time in that kind of space, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, other than just like doodling for fun, making pictures on Windows Paint as a kid. Yeah, that was the
yeah,
first time I ever tried to make like a cartoon like movie or show or however you want to call it, It ended up being the whole thing was about 30 to 40 minutes long. So it was like, a long TV show or something. And
yeah.
that was definitely the first time that I ever tried to create something to that effect.
Yeah. Now, with the game, because you did mention the game was more complex in terms of time consuming and
Yeah.
different things like that, because probably one of the things, and this is just one thing I have to imagine, is when you're creating, whether it's a quick TV show, quick movie, you just have a straight narrative. It's just the person who's watching just watches, and it's going to go from A to B, and that's it. Whereas in the game, you pretty much are having to create these different scenarios. These different scenarios can happen depending on what the player's doing, right? So you almost have to have a little bit
Yeah.
of a selection there.
For sure. So yeah, like for example, if you want to have NPC, so like a non-playable character that the players playing the game can talk to, and you want to have an option. So you talk to the character and they say, A or B, and you have to choose. You have to create dialogue for each choice. And then if you want to have maybe a quest that begins when you click yes, for example, you have to set up maybe a whole nother storyline or a whole nother quest line. And then if they say no, you have to create dialogue and change the story depending on that option. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot more time consuming. And then there's tons of like nitty gritty details. So, it's a turn-based RPG. So it's one of those kind of games where you get into a battle, you have like hit points or HP, your like
Yeah.
health bar, and then you have a set of moves, attacks. So you have to set up each attack that every character or every enemy will have. You have to create damage formulas. So like how much damage will a fire attack do against this enemy, or how much
Yeah.
damage will a physical attack. So you have to set up all of the numbers for how much damage, and getting that balanced right, so it's not too easy, it's not too difficult. That was also a pretty big pain.
Oh yeah, no,
But
I'm
yeah,
sure.
I mean, just trying to explain to you the process really doesn't do it justice. So like, I would just recommend anybody to just go on YouTube and look up RPG Maker MV tutorials just to get a sense if they want to see like what it would take to create a game, because it's definitely something that you have to have a lot of time and patience to do. And like, looking back on it, I probably wouldn't try to do something like that again for a long time. Just, I don't know if it was really worth it in the end. It was fun, but it's a lot of work.
Well, I mean, you created something, you put it out, you know, spent a lot of time on it. So number one, let's plug it. Let's get, you know, tell the people what the name is, how they can find it. Because obviously, you know, anybody who spends that kind of time and stuff, I think it's really important that we at least you know, showcase that to some extent. So
Yeah, so if you want to play the game, you have to have a Nintendo Switch. Go to the Nintendo eShop and then search on the eShop for RPG Maker MV Player. You can download that, which is free. And then once you download the RPG Maker MV Player, you'll go into that software and you'll search for Kingdom of Neandria, or also you can look up Game ID, which is number 405. And then once you download that, you can play the game on your Switch. So it doesn't cost anything to play the game. And I think you told me before we got on this call that you haven't played it yet. So
yeah,
Tony,
no, I
get
definitely.
with it.
Yeah. Well, I've struggled with the Switch, and it's funny because I've actually, despite my issues, and I think it's just because I've been so PlayStation orientated. But one thing I have said, you know, with Nintendo, period, I think one of the biggest reasons why Nintendo is still in the game is because they are very user friendly overall. Like this is what made me think of this. So I bought my son Super Mario Odyssey, or Mario Odyssey, for the Switch. And, you know, right away, you put the game in, boom, it's ready to go. You don't have to download a 100 GB file. You know, what is it? Why is it that like the PlayStation, the Xbox, you know, you have to do this? And I would think at first maybe it's the graphics, but the graphics on that game aren't slouch. I mean, these are nice, high definition, 3-dimensional graphics. So, I mean, is it just as simple as the cartridge? I mean, I don't know how much you know about this stuff, but do you think it's as simple as just that cartridge technology that they still use, that just, you know, versus if you're having a CD, it still has to, you know, transmit that data to the console differently than that cartridge does? I mean, what do you think that really is?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the cartridge versus disc format, I think the cartridge has always had the advantage of less loading times. But in terms of the continual software updates that you have to do on like your Xbox, because yeah, I had an Xbox One a few years ago, and I ended up never really playing it because every time I turned it on, it was like a 30-minute update.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of that, I kind of just have I don't know the technical aspect, but I think that they kind of go into it with a mindset of like they're building almost like a computer gaming system. And I don't know if it's just like a different approach or different philosophy, but yeah, that for some reason you don't really have that problem with the Switch. I mean, all the updates that I've had to do on the Switch take maybe like 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one thing I will say when I've played it, it's just been very user friendly. You can get to the gameplay right away, and I have had a couple updates, but I mean, very quick. I mean, so it's just I'd like, you know, I'd like to know more about that. I mean, obviously, I know that you're not in that you know, in that deep of everything, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, definitely PS4, PS5, and Xbox One, or the new Xbox, is it Series S? I mean, they're definitely far more powerful than the Switch. So whatever kind of memory they're having to process or computations, like I'm sure it's much farther beyond than the Switch is dealing with. But yeah, in terms of the 30-minute updates every single time I would try to play it, I don't know. To me, that's
a big turnoff.
Yeah, huge for sure.
You know, nobody. I mean, I luckily have pretty good internet now, but you know, even with that being said, like there's so many people that I talk to. You know, Call of Duty, for example. Call of Duty is notorious right now for just people having to delete so much space because of this game that now it's the only game that they can play. So it's just, to me, that is like ridiculous. Like that's just, there's got to be a better way of doing things. I don't know. So I feel like these other Sony, Microsoft definitely can take some notes from Nintendo. I mean, obviously, sure. I totally understand that they clearly don't want to be Nintendo, right? They've drew that line in the sand, a long time ago. At least Sony did. I'm sure Xbox as well. That, hey, if you want like the super like kid friendly cartoon kind of games, go over there. We're more about realism and all that kind of stuff. So that's fine, and that's why it's good. Each kind of company can exist in their own space, and but at least that there's got to be some way, especially now in 2021, there has to be some way where you can just insert the game and boom, you're good to go. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. But nevertheless, the one thing that I did want to ask you is so like, let's say, going back to the whole game creation thing, not specifically what you did, but just game creation in general, you're also someone who wrote a book. So do you think, like, in terms of your creative mind, would you prefer, let's say you could only do one thing on a game. Let's say like a game development company hired you and they said, all right, Sean, we're going to hire you on this game, but you can only do one thing. So you can either develop the story and the characters, bios, all that kind of stuff, or you can get more in the like physical creation of what the characters look like, what the world building looks like. Where would you, put yourself in that position?
Yeah, that's tough, man. Because I really enjoy just like the creative aspect of placing a house and putting a tree here. Like I'm huge into like other games like that. Like Animal Crossing is one of those types of games where you're given like kind of a toolkit of just creating your own kind of world, and I love that aspect. I've never got into the Minecraft games, but that whole kind of concept, I love that. But yeah, I also like writing, and I like kind of imagining characters. But to me, like the writing doesn't come naturally. It oftentimes like has to just kind of hit me in the right moment, and I'll just feel like inspired to write, and then I'll be really happy for the most part with how it comes out. But if I'm having to do that as a job, like it just doesn't come to me, and so I won't really typically be happy with whatever I end up writing. I probably won't use it. So just from that aspect, I mean, I think if I was going into this as like a 9 to 5 job, I would probably rather just be building the visuals and creating my world.
No, that definitely makes sense for sure, because if you're if you're writing something and you're because the ideas come to you naturally, if you're basically like forced to kind of keep your writing within a constraint and say, hey, this is pretty much what the story is going to be, we just need you to fill in the lines, then I can see how that does seem a little unfulfilling if it's not an idea you yourself came up with originally.
Well, yeah, and I feel like if I was like under the pressure of like you have to come up with a story or a character by this deadline, it wouldn't be enjoyable, and I don't think it would turn out that great for me. But if I just was like, oh, you have to create this world and you have to have it done, like I don't know, I feel like there's less pressure there. I wouldn't have the problem of doing that. But
yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, one thing, I'm sure you've heard a lot about Cyberpunk. I don't know if you've gotten to play it yet.
Yeah, I haven't played it, but I've been keeping up with the shitstorm of the. Are you allowed to cuss on your podcast?
Oh yeah, you can definitely.
Yeah, I've been keeping up with the absolute shitstorm of the release, which is really it's shocking because I loved The Witcher 3, so I was kind of like a big CD Projekt Red fan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of sad to see them like completely fall from their stature of, people love them. Now it's like I don't think they'll ever be trusted in the gaming community for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I was super excited about the game. I didn't even hear about the game when it first was announced in 2012. At least I don't remember that. I just remember it from recent, like a couple of years ago when Keanu Reeves came, out of that conference. I love you too, or whatever he said. That big moment. And I was super hyped up about it. I thought the game looked amazing from the commercials and everything like that. And I've been wanting, and I'm probably like alone in this, but like, cause I'm a big Grand Theft Auto fan, I always thought, man, it would be really cool to have Grand Theft Auto based in the future where you got like hovering cars and that kind of thing. And that's what this seemed like. It seemed like that's what this was doing. So I was really excited about it. So I got it pretty much right when it came out. And right away, like I knew something was weird because I went to buy it and I go to GameStop and I'm like, okay, let me get the PS5 version because I have a PS5 of
Right.
Cyberpunk. And they're like, well, technically there's not a PS5 version, but you'll be able to get one. Because right now with PS5, a lot of these games, if they don't have a quote unquote PS5 version, they'll either let you download the PS5 version right away, or it's, to be determined when it'll come out and then you'll be able to download it. So right on the cover of this game right away, like it says it has a sticker, PS5 version. But so I'm figuring, okay, I can just go ahead and download this game. And then I had to Google and find out that it's not even, out yet. So that was a weird miscommunication, like right from the jump.
Mm-hmm.
And, I download this game and everything, like get it going. And, and I kind of did like a whole review about this. It hasn't come out yet, but we can kind of like, just kind of little different points. The story is really good, and that's one of the reasons why I thought of the game, because we talk about the story and the graphics and everything that goes into a game. Story, like I could sit and watch this story. If this was a movie, I could watch it, I'd be entertained. Pretty good story. But the graphics for my PS5, again, latest generation console that there is on the market at the moment, not good. Literally some of these graphics reminded me of like a PS3 game. And that was something, a rumor I heard, but I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way. But yeah, there's, and then when they're talking, like it's, and again, I don't want to complain about too much, but it's, I feel like games have been out for a while that when the character talks, it seems like they're at least somewhat mouthing the words that they're saying. This,
Right.
it's just like a robot, like the mouth is moving even when the words aren't coming out. So that looked really sloppy. And, but at the same time, the gameplay is fun. When you're like in a first person shooting, event and stuff like that, that can be really fun. But just like there's a lot of weird, bogginess to it. Like you mentioned the one thing about, non-playable characters when you go up and talk to them. So this was a huge thing that I think is the stupidest thing that they did. And again, I don't want to disparage anyone's job, whoever's job it was to do this or whoever's decision it was. But so like every person, and again, this is a big city, so there's a lot of people you're walking by, but every person generates a queue to talk, right? A talk queue. Every person in the city you walk by, it doesn't matter who they are. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, if you're going to let me talk to everybody, maybe I'm going to be able to have somewhat of a conversation. Maybe this is some utility to the game where I can get information out of them about something that's going on. No, nothing. It's literally just press talk. What are you doing? Hi. And it's like one word, and then there's nothing else. So it's like, to me, like, don't even make that a thing. Like, don't cue every time I walk by someone, talk, like it's supposed to be some bigger, purpose. It was just, so that was the thing that like I thought was super dumb. But again, I don't know. And that was the thing that I said in my review, because I've seen gameplay for people who have PCs and it looks beautiful. It looks as good as it did in the commercials. But I think, in my true opinion, I don't think they actually had this game ready for consoles. I think they either didn't have it ready or didn't really care about the consoles, and they were just like, whatever, we want to make as much money off of it as we can. Whatever the case is, obviously I don't want to assume things, but that's what it felt like.
Well, that's the unfortunate part about just from the PR standpoint, because they're a company that I think a lot of people really trusted because of their high quality work in their past games, like The Witcher 3. So
Yeah.
when this came out, apparently from what I've read, they didn't give any of the review copies to reviewers. Like they didn't give any of the PC, or they only gave them the PC version. They didn't give them the console versions. And so people think they might have deliberately did that to deceive the reviewers. Because when it first came out, it got like across the board really high scores. I think on Metacritic, the PC has like an 89 or 90.
Yeah.
And then if you look at like the PS4 or the Xbox One version now, they have like their ratings are like a 50 out of 100. So I think like if they would have just been honest and said, okay, we're going to release the PC version in time for the holidays, but we're going to delay the console versions, or if they would have even said like, we're releasing the console version, but we're going to need to do an update in a month or two, like to just let people know up front what they're getting. I think they could have avoided a lot of the problems that they've faced since it launched. But I think there was like a sense that they kind of deceived the consumer, which like, It's unfortunate because this game definitely was like probably the most anticipated game of easily of the year, probably of the decade.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
to just watch it come out like in such a debacle, it's just like, yeah, it's unfortunate.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, yeah, I feel like the honesty, the thing that you suggested, that would have been so much better. But it does seem like, there was whoever the business, the super, the people at the top who are all about the bottom line. It seemed like they just were like deceive people, and just the idea that they didn't think people would notice, to me, is pretty like hilarious. Like if because
Well, yeah, I feel like they had to have known that people would notice. I think it was more or less that they figured if we already have so many millions of pre-orders, maybe some percentage of the people will return it, but most of the people are just going to wait until the updates come. So they're
yeah,
making their money.
yeah,
I think that was the bottom line.
yeah, for sure. No, I mean, you're definitely probably right. Yeah, it is just it's one of those weird things, man. But yeah, I mean, obviously video games, I think there's a lot of different things that we can really talk about, because like we said earlier on, you're currently in Japan. What I would suggest is kind of the heart of video games, or the beginning of video games. So video games seem pretty rooted in Japan culture. Is that a fair assessment, a fair understanding?
Uh, in terms of like, I would say like in terms of the general population, I mean, video games are a big part of Japanese culture, but I would say they're probably a big part of American culture at this point too. I mean, in terms of sales, the US market is probably a bigger market than Japan. But you still have like, yeah, you have like your gamers here. I mean, I don't know though if I would say it's that much different than the US market in terms of just like the amount of people who play games. That maybe I would say like I see more commercials on TV for games in Japan,
Yeah.
but it's just like my anecdotal one person's
Yeah,
experience.
just your experience and stuff. Yeah, it's just, I mean, obviously, like as an American, there's so much of Japan that I don't see. The only thing that you see in TV shows and movies is really Tokyo. So, it
Right.
looks like it's a city from the future. There's like statues of Mario, like,
Yeah, it's so yeah. I guess in terms of like the impact that Nintendo or like maybe certain IPs have had in Japan, like Mario or Pac-Man. Like I will say, like one thing you do see a lot in Japan is you see arcades, and you see just like places that are just filled with people playing arcade games and video
yeah.
games. And obviously, you have that in the U.S., but maybe to a lesser extent than you do in Japan.
No, especially
Yeah,
now.
I mean
Yeah.
Nintendo is like I think the most profitable company, or like they've made the most profit in the past year in Japan. So they're one of the biggest companies here. Period. Uh, so I mean they're gonna have probably a bigger influence just because of that reason. Whereas like in the U.S., you take the biggest gaming company in the U.S. I don't know, would that be EA, Electronic Arts? And
I mean, you're talking about that hires like is games are made in America kind of thing.
yeah, like yeah, I mean like I'm just saying like the biggest company in the US who makes games probably doesn't have the same cultural significance in the US that
Yeah.
like Nintendo has in Japan,
Oh yeah, no, that
for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, Nintendo is the biggest. I mean, it's hard to argue that they're not the biggest game company ever, because they've been around the longest and they've survived. I mean, it's if you think about that time period that they came from, and how many game consoles, game ideas have came and went since then, and they are still not only existing, but everybody, when Switch came out, it became really hard to get. I think to this day it's hard to get one. I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not like, the PS5 or the new Xbox. Yeah, sure. The first couple months they're out, it's hard to get. That makes sense. Switch has been out for what, a couple years at least.
Going on its fourth year. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, so that says a lot. I mean, they're, as much as I grew up, I was on Team Sega when I was a kid. And, me and the neighbor down the street had Nintendo. We'd always argue about it. But at the end of the day, they understood. I don't know if I want to say they understood the future, but they understood, like, they knew who they were, instead
Mhm.
of like, you know, I feel like it seemed like Sega at the time was and I don't know if did you watch that Console Wars I told you about, that documentary?
I think I
Yes.
don't know if I didn't watch it when you had mentioned it, but I'm pretty sure I had seen it before.
Yeah, I think you saw, because there's a YouTube channel that did a really good covering of it, and it's
Yeah.
the CBS All Access version pretty much, you know, built off of that. It's their version is more detailed and stuff like that, but it's same kind of concept. But yeah, I mean, Sega, it seemed like there was definitely a war within itself. Like you had the American sector of Sega and the Japanese sector of Sega, and they're, you know, for whatever reason, um, they just were at war with each other. So they were not able to, it didn't seem like they were able to move forward as a company. And Nintendo very much stayed cohesive with itself. It seems like they didn't, you know, whoever the top people at Nintendo in Japan were, seemed to maintain a good relationship with its American sector. It didn't seem like there was this divide. And, you know, when it came to like the mid 90s and the next gen of games, I don't know if you'd call it third gen or whatever number it was at that time, it was pretty much like Sega just was dropped the ball. They were, I don't know if you know this, but I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, Sony, before Sony had a game console, the Sega was collaborating with them to come up with a new game console that,
Mhm.
you know, was going to be the Sega Saturn or whatever. And
Right.
then Nintendo ended up, you know, working with, you know, having some deal with Sony or something like that. And then Sony's just like, you know, we want to do our own thing. So, you know, they completely dropped the ball. Sega Saturn ended up being like, it had to be like one of the biggest flops in game console history, right? I mean, it just,
Yeah, I mean, Saturn definitely didn't do as well as its competition. I don't know if it did. It like there was also like the 32X. I think Sega released that before the Saturn, and that I think was a much bigger flop than
yeah,
the Saturn. But the Saturn I think did okay. It's just that the timing of it was really bad because it came out like I think a year before the PlayStation, and then 2 years before the Nintendo 64. So it's like by the time that it came out, it wasn't even new anymore.
yeah. No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
Nintendo,
yeah, no, Nintendo. To your point, though, I mean, they definitely march to the beat of their own drum. But and I think one of the things that separates Nintendo from most other gaming companies is they really just have a focus on creating like these really memorable characters and great gaming experiences, rather than maybe like trying to pander to a certain audience. So, like with
yeah,
Sega, I never grew up as a really a Sega fan. I was always in Team Nintendo.
yeah,
But my impression of Sega, just kind of looking back at the 90s and from my remembrance of growing up with that, is that they kind of were trying to appeal to like an American audience or like
mhm,
a more adult audience. Whereas Nintendo, I feel like they're just trying to appeal to just anybody who wants to have a fun gaming experience
yeah,
and not really trying to like cater to any sort of demographic. But oftentimes, Nintendo does piss people off because some of their decisions are just kind of like, what are they thinking? Like the Wii, for example, like it sold amazingly. I think it was their
yeah,
best selling console, but a lot of gamers, it's fun to play with the Wiimote and the nunchucks
yeah,
for like a couple hours or a couple days, and then it's like you kind of just want to go back to the traditional controller. So I think Nintendo does take like some risks and they do things kind of their own way, but it doesn't always pay off for them.
yeah. No, for sure. I mean, they've definitely had some misses, and whatever the thing was before the Switch, I mean, that thing came and went with the quickness. That
The Wii
thing,
U, yeah.
was that the Wii U with the screen?
The
It was
Wii
like
U,
each controller
yeah.
was like a tablet or
Yeah,
something
that
like that.
was that was a flop. I mean, that might have been probably worse than the Sega Saturn in terms of sales.
Yeah. But it seemed like they were able to just come out with the Switch. I mean, it didn't seem like that big of a gap of time. It seemed like they were like, oh, the Wii U didn't work. So let's move on to this next thing. Let's get it ready. It seemed like it wasn't that big of a gap of time between the two.
So I think the Wii U came out in maybe 2013, and the Wii or the Switch came out in 2017. So about 4 years,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah, I mean,
that's,
before the Switch, there was a lot of talk like, is Nintendo going to go the way of Sega? Because, after the Saturn and then the Dreamcast, there just wasn't really a path forward for Sega to make money in this market anymore.
Yeah.
And so if Nintendo would have flopped with the Switch and they would have had the Wii U and then the Switch flop, I think there could have been the chance that Nintendo maybe would have just stuck to making like Game Boy type of hardware, or maybe they would have just made third-party games for other consoles. But fortunately, the Switch has been extremely successful for them.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure Nintendo definitely has a decent bank account to play with, in terms of taking risk, and because they've been around so long. I mean, yeah, I mean, the Wii U wasn't successful. It didn't feel like the GameCube at the time was successful, but it developed a cult following. It seemed like it was kind of one of those things that when it first comes out doesn't totally get that grab, but it seemed like over time, like there's still people that like are big fans of the GameCube that I'll see people post, and so it seemed like it gained that cult following, later. It didn't
Well, I
get it right
mean,
away.
it has Nintendo games that you can't play anywhere else, and so there's always going to be those Nintendo classics.
Yeah.
Every console Nintendo makes, other than maybe the Virtual Boy, which was like one of their biggest flops, but other than that, like they're always going to have really good games, so they're going to always have a fan base no matter what console it is. So even the
Yeah.
Wii U has some really great games that people are probably going to be playing in 10 or 20 years from now, although they've ported a lot of the Wii U games to the Switch, so there's less of a reason to own a Wii U now. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, GameCube had some phenomenal games. In terms of the sales, though, it did moderately well, I suppose, but in comparison to the PS2, I mean, it got blown out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, it's interesting looking back on it all, because it's especially when I was a kid, I'll never forget, because I was, again, very, entrenched in the Sega, the commercials, and, really all that was good marketing. Their whole thing was, we can't be Nintendo, so we're going to be the edgy kids. We're going to try to market to say, hey, Nintendo is for like the dorks. Sega's like,
Right.
you're a badass if you have a Sega. You're like, it's all rock and roll and grunge, and
Right.
but it's all cartoon games too. It's just they had like a different kind of marketing, and really good marketing strategy, because they wouldn't have even been able to exist without that marketing strategy for the time frame they
Right.
were. But yeah, I totally bought it. Like, I was a kid, I was sucked into it. The people in my house were sucked into it. So when, the next gen was being decided, I remember it was like I think both of the consoles had already come out, but as a kid, it seemed like everything was brand new. But basically it was like, hey, my dad was like, all right, you can get like a game console for Christmas, and you can either choose, well, basically he said choose whatever you want, kind of thing. And I was like, I really want the Sega Saturn, because I was knee deep in Sega. And he's like, no, I don't think you want that. And I don't know how he had the insight of that, because he wasn't like a big gamer or anything. He must have just read reviews. I don't know. But he's like, I think you should try this PlayStation thing. And at the time, my dad was who my dad was married to had an older son that was like already living outside his he was like 30 years, he was way older than me. He had his own house and everything like that. And so he had the PlayStation, he brought it over, and like he had Twisted Metal, and and I was like, oh yeah, like Tekken. I was like, yeah, this kicks ass. Like, I totally want this instead. So and that was just my anecdotal experience. But because I remember my friend who was actually the kid of this dude that my dad worked for, he made some decent money. He was decently well off, and this kid had everything. I mean, I would go in this kid, he had, it was the stereotype 90s rich kid. He had the sports
I
car
think we all had
bed.
a friend like that.
Yeah, the sports car bed, all this cool stuff in his room, huge train tracks everywhere, like every stereotype of like a 90s rich kid, this kid had it.
Right.
So he got the Sega Saturn like right away. And I think it was like Raymond or whatever that game was. And I was like, this doesn't really seem that fun, like in comparison to like Twisted Metal, or especially if the whole, like the last gen, they were talking about how edgy they were. Like, it totally like that, that, not that that's, again, the only reason to own a game, but that was what I was kind of in my mindset at the time. So I just think that's funny how like the game consoles, I mean, really any corporation, but it's like, do you feel like now it's harder to break in than it was in the 90s as a new console, or do you think it's always hard and you just better hope that you have a really good product to bring to the market and really good marketing if you want to bring
So
it.
do you mean in terms of making like new hardware or just as a game developer?
Well, I would say new hardware. Like I say, if you say, hey, I want to be my own console, I want to
I
bring a
would say,
console to
yeah,
market.
it's I don't know if it's more difficult because I don't think it's ever been like, I think it's always been difficult probably. I mean, the reason Xbox was able to get in, or Microsoft was able to get in with the Xbox, is because Microsoft has billions of dollars that they can throw behind it.
Yeah.
Now you look at like the most recent entry, I guess, would be Google with their Google Stadia. Do you know about the Google
Yeah.
Stadia? There's
Yeah,
like
it's
4
all
people
streaming.
that play it.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a company that has endless amounts of money, and it doesn't seem to be taking off. I think because the streaming idea isn't really there yet. I don't think most people are really ready for that kind of gaming experience. I mean, just for one, I don't know that they have like that many people have the network connection to play games the way that they are meant to be played on through streaming. And personally, like I would never really want to have all my games just on a cloud that I can stream, because for me, it's like I like to own the game. I like to be able to play the game whenever I want to be able to play it. I don't want to be connected to the internet or have to be connected to the internet to play it. So I think like you take that kind of example, is it harder for a company like Google to break in? I guess it would just depend on like what the idea they're trying to sell is. I don't think that they necessarily needed to fail, but because of the idea that they tried to implement, I don't think it was the time. So I don't know. I think now there's probably a bigger market for games than ever before. So from that standpoint, it's probably easier to break in. But you do have like the Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo who have like their history now, and people are kind of committed to each one of those platforms. So it's probably hard to get people take away audience from those consoles.
Yeah, and it does seem I feel like as much as it's the game developers probably hate this aspect of it, I feel like marketing is almost as much or maybe even more contingent on the success of hardware or the games itself versus the actual games. Because like Google, I think one of their problems is I've barely seen any marketing for this, and their company is almost like what's the word I'm looking for? They have so much different products and so much things going on. It doesn't seem like they're really putting a lot of focus into the Stadia, where I feel like Microsoft put a pretty good amount of focus into the Xbox. Like they, Bill Gates was coming out himself at these events. So they seem to really be like, we really want this gaming thing to be successful, where it doesn't seem like Google really cares. I mean, they have to care a little bit because they probably invested some money, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the marketing. I'm not seeing. So I think that's such a big part of I'm not just success in the gaming market, probably everything. And it is weird to think about, because you really truly want to, as a human being or as a consumer, want to say, oh, if someone did made something that's good enough, it should just sell on its own. But yeah, I mean, I think the marketing just is really, unfortunately, better or worse, is really what's going to drive that product into consumer hands more than anything else.
I mean, I do think it's important to have a game that's exclusive that people will want to play, because like, Microsoft had Halo when the Xbox came out. Nintendo has Nintendo games. Sony has Naughty Dog and all their great first party exclusives. Stadia, as far as I know, doesn't have any like standout game that I'm like, oh, I need to get a Stadia to play that game.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you completely that like marketing is huge. I mean, Microsoft clearly like hired people that knew how to meet gamers. But I think part of that also was having a game that they could sell to people.
Yeah.
Whereas like Stadia doesn't have any games that I'm aware of that you can't play elsewhere that you need to play. And it just seems like the people running that division, I don't know like too much about it, so I don't want to like discredit the people working there, but I don't know, it seems like they're just like PR people who want to try to sell this and don't necessarily have like the gamers experience at heart.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it doesn't feel like that, at least. It doesn't feel like there's gamers running it or gamers involved. So I don't know. I mean, I've already seen that thing in like a resell shop. Like there's this place. I'm sure you probably know about Disc Replay. I mean, you haven't been out of America that long. So, but yeah, that place is really cool, man. They have like video game consoles that I completely forgot or never knew even existed. I mean, just it's like a video game museum in there, so it's pretty
Is that
cool.
a chain? I was only familiar with the one location of that store.
There it is a chain. Yeah, the one that's
Okay.
closest to me is 14 and John R, which I'm assuming was the one that was closest to you.
No, I went to the one on Shaner by like Hall
Oh.
Road.
Interesting. I didn't know, but I mean, okay.
Yeah, I
well, fair
love
enough.
that store. You can
Yeah.
find so many classic games there.
Yeah, and Time Travelers, I don't know if you've ever been there in Berkeley. It was really, really cool as well.
I never been there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Next time you're in town, I'll definitely
Yeah, well, if my passport is ever worth anything again, I have to be able to come back to Japan if I go to America.
Oh, I think we talked about this the last time you were here, didn't we? There was
Yeah.
something about the passport or something. Are you allowed to
Well, I
talk
mean,
about
American
that?
passports are worthless now with the pandemic. It's like if you want to travel.
Oh,
you
that's
can-
what you mean. Because I think
Yeah.
before it was something about like the work visa thing, but that's not the case for you right now. It's just more
No,
about
it's about being able to get back to Japan. But yeah, like American passports, I don't think you can use them really for any travel at this point. Maybe you
Yeah.
can go to like Puerto Rico.
yeah,
Guam.
which I guess is technically I don't know how that's all considered, but I think it's technically the U.S. or technically not.
Yeah,
I don't know.
you
That's
might not
one of
need a
those things.
passport for Puerto Rico. But yeah, I mean, like I'd love to come visit like once a year or something, but it's not looking good right now.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't advise you traveling until this thing's more cleared up.
Of course, yeah.
What's the timeline with Japan on the vaccine, or is that really even a concern? Because Japan had like a handful of cases.
Right now they're at their kind of worst point in the whole pandemic. So like this past week, I think they've seen a rise in cases. I think maybe hit like their highest single day record like a day or two ago. But yeah, the vaccine they're supposed to have it available for doctors and nurses in February, the elderly in March, and then like everyone else in April. So
That's a nice that you have that timeline in front of you.
yeah, that's the plan. But it's like, as bad as it is right now in Japan, it's still not even close to what you guys are experiencing over there in terms of just like the daily numbers. So it's I don't think the urgency is quite the same.
Yeah, and you're not, you feel safer there and
Definitely.
everything. And I think, I mean, me and you have talked about this before, well, via messaging, because when you were here, the thing that's an interesting story. So that's something I really want to bring up. Because the last time you came here, this whole thing really just started happening. And so in Japan, nothing was shut down. Everything was normal. There was no like day-to-day life was the same it's always been. You guys get to Detroit out of the airplane or into the airport, and it's like The Walking Dead or a zombie apocalypse.
Well, yeah, as we're landing in Detroit, they tell us, or like the airline attendants, or I forget if I overheard it, but like I was told or informed that they had closed the border from the UK to the US. And I think it was like, yeah, the UK and maybe other countries in Europe. They had just shut down as we were landing in Detroit.
Wow.
So then, like after 2 days of being in Detroit, is when they closed or it was when they implemented the lockdown in Michigan.
Yeah.
And then, like I think maybe by Wednesday, so I landed in Detroit on Saturday, and then by Wednesday they closed down the Canadian border. And then it was like I started thinking like I got to get back to Japan before they close that border. And they ended up closing it like the day after I got back to Japan. So I made it just in time.
Just in time.
But yeah, man, it was crazy. Like getting to the US right as the pandemic like really started to hit the fan.
Yeah. Well, that and like so for you, what day-to-day life in Detroit and Michigan looks like. So that for you was obviously a stark difference, I'm sure, seeing that, but you got to see that progress almost kind of happen. Whereas your lady, your person, your partner, that was her first time in America at all, right? So she never saw America in regular day-to-day life.
It was really unfortunate because we got there on Saturday, and then I think it was Sunday we went to a bar or a restaurant. And then I think on Monday, we went to Mexican Town in Detroit, and we got there and we sat down to eat. It was like 2:00 and they told us they're closing at 3. Wow. I'm like, why are you closing? And they're like, oh, everybody has to close. And that's when we learned that like the lockdown was happening.
Wow.
So we got to go to like 2 restaurants, and then that was it. We couldn't go out anywhere after that.
Wow.
We went to a mall, and there was like literally nobody there. It was kind of
Wow.
surreal. It
Yeah.
felt like the end of the world, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, I
And
think like
oh, sorry, I was gonna say too. I remember like Shuri, that's her name, my girlfriend. She was wearing her mask, and like Japan, everybody wears a mask.
yeah.
It's not really a thing people question. But in America, like, granted, it was still very really early on in the pandemic. But I remember we went somewhere, and one of the guys working at a store was like telling her like, "Oh, the mask doesn't really do anything. You don't need to wear a mask." I mean, granted, like, again, like, they didn't know really what was about to hit them. They didn't know
Yeah.
what was really coming, but it's just like that attitude doesn't really seem to have changed for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is because again, this is my anecdotal thing from my own eyes, but I see like a lot of people on Facebook, like I'm friends with a lot of people on Facebook that are like, oh, you mask sheep and this and that. But when they go out in public, they put the mask on. So I think a lot of people like to throw that stick around without actually interacting. Because I've only seen one person in real life who was like not wearing the mask. And I don't know if they had a medical issue. They were younger, so I doubt they did. But I was at Target, and we're like in the checkout thing. And the guy working there, like I didn't even notice at first because she was at the self checkout, like right behind me. And he goes, "Ma'am, you got to put a mask on. If you want, I can give you a mask." Like he was not being mean about it or anything. And obviously at this point, just giving her a mask when she's leaving is kind of weird. But so she's like, "Nope, that's okay." And he's like, "Well, you got to put a mask on." And she's like, "Nope, I'm okay. I'm not going to do it." And then just like, she was checking out anyway. So it's not like you can't really kick somebody out who's just on their way out anyway. But that was
Yeah.
the only time that I, ever saw somebody. So I think that, Americans themselves, like obviously, regardless of what your political, cultural subclass is, I think even the people who like are the big, anti-maskers, as you call them, I think there's only a fraction of them who actually, will be interacting that way in public, because no matter how much stuff they talk about on Facebook about how it's not scary, I just don't believe that. I think a lot of it is like them pumping their chest out. I think that, obviously a lot of people have died from this. We all have older family members. We all have family members that are susceptible to it, or family members that have even got it, died, got it, survived, whatever. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is a facade that, again, the rest of the world is going to see. And, that it's one of those American, stereotypes, right? Whether it's the John Wayne Wild West thing or whatever, it is. I think it's one of those things that gets, and again, it gets made huge because of the people that are doing it. But I haven't seen in my real life that many people who are actually willing to put their what's the phrase I'm looking for? Put their money where their mouth is, or put their mask where their mouth isn't, or something.
Yeah.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen that as much in real life as I think a lot of the media and different things would kind of let you believe.
Right. Yeah, I mean, most people probably would rather just get their grocery shopping done without having the hassle of getting yelled at, I'm sure, even if they don't want to wear a mask.
Yeah, well, even if you don't want to wear it, or just, now, because I remember at first, like when this whole thing was first happening, there was definitely less and less people wearing masks because it was such a new thing. But eventually it got to the point where, like, if you didn't wear a mask, you were like sticking out like a sore thumb. And a lot of people, like, they might have just forgot or whatever the case was. So right away, you feel like when you're sticking out like a sore thumb, regardless of what it's for, you notice that, like, you're.
Yeah, totally. No, I had that experience myself. I like about maybe a month ago or a few weeks ago. I was on my way to work in the morning, and I take like a subway, and then I take a bus to get to my job. And I left my house, walked to the station, got on the subway, got to the bus station, got on the bus, and I'm sitting on the bus, and I realize I forgot to put a mask on. And this is the only time in like the last 8 months that I've left the house without a mask. And for some
Wow.
reason, I just like totally forgot to put a mask on. And it was weird because when I left my house that morning, like I had the thought, like, there's something missing today. Like I'm missing, I forgot something, but I didn't really like connect it to the fact that I wasn't wearing a mask. So like as soon as I realized that on the bus, and then I just started thinking like, oh man, everybody's looking at me right now. I felt like I turned red. I just felt like so embarrassed. So like as soon as I got off the bus, I went and bought a mask. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's an uncomfortable feeling when you feel that. When
Well, I'm
everybody's
sure
looking
for
at you.
you too, you had two different thoughts, right? I'm the guy not wearing a mask,
Ah,
but I'm
and I'm
also
the
the
foreigner.
American. And so they're already expecting me to like be doing
Right.
up to something bad.
Stupid
So
American.
yeah. So yeah, I'm sure you had both of those going. One thing too that I want to talk to you about, ask your opinion. I think we may have briefly talked about this, I'm not sure, but something I always want to talk about is, again, I'm viewing this from my standpoint. I've never been to Japan. Any Japanese person I know has been Americanized and everything like that. So I obviously don't have the same experience or as much data to pull from as you do, but you know, it seems like that there's definitely in the culture of Japan, as much as obviously there's things that Americans pull from in Japan that's come from Japanese culture, it does seem like there is some, I don't know if I want to call it Americanization to their culture or Westernization, but like if you look at like the anime, for example, that comes out of there, I mean, these characters are, I mean, they're white, they have super big eyes, blue eyes, at least the anime that I see, that comes across my peripheral. And so I don't know if that's done just to try to market to Americans or if that's just what, is coming, the norm of anime. Or, even if you look at Mario, Mario's this Italian plumber. There's not many characters, it seems like, that come out of there in terms of animation or culture that seem to actually, look Asian or look Japanese. And it seems like the Japanese stuff that comes out that was made it like the samurai stuff and all this kind of stuff, that almost seems like to be American made. It doesn't seem like they're really pushing the ancient Japanese kind of things into their media. Is that like a fair, analyzation?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the art style of anime, I can't really speak to that. I don't know in terms of I mean, their eyes are exaggerated, but I don't know that there's like I wouldn't say they're going for like a Western look or anything like that. There's definitely a large influence of Europe and America and Japan. I mean, I think that goes back to like the 19th century, under like the government at the time, the Meiji government, and he was really big on modernizing Japan. So I think they borrowed a lot of like European American influences in that time period, just because they wanted to industrialize. And when you're industrializing, you have to kind of integrate with the rest of the global economy, So I think that had a huge kind of influence. And then after the war, after World War II, America was the biggest supporter of Japan and like propping up the economy and getting them back on their feet. So I think, there's a huge amount of cultural, what would be the word? Cultural integration or just like cultural overlap. So yeah, I mean, like even English, language here, it's like there's much more of a burden on Japanese people, like growing up in schools and learning English, than there ever will be for an American learning Japanese. I mean,
Right.
it's more one way, I'd say. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely large Western or European American influence on Japan, just because of the economics alone, and then other reasons, I'm sure. But in terms of like traditional Japanese culture and like the things that you might stereotypically associate with that, so like samurais or kimonos or tea, tea ceremonies or something. Yeah, I think there's definitely like a big part of Japanese culture that tries to what would be the word, like savor that, or to say kind of still
Conserve
continue
it,
to
hold on to it,
celebrate
pass
it
it
or
down.
elevate it. And yeah, so there's definitely, you do see like a lot of that stuff in the media or in the anime or in the advertisements or whatever. But yeah, I think there's like kind of a sense of like Japan is caught between its traditions of the past and like the modernization of technology and going forward. And I kind of feel like they're somewhere in the middle of that. I don't know, like sometimes you see it kind of integrated together, and then sometimes you see it going one. I don't know. It feels like it's kind of at a crossroad.
I gotcha. Yeah, and we talked about too is like what seems to be the rise of nationalism throughout the world. And you did mention like how there's even in Japan there's groups that are kind of more in that nationalist kind of flair. Would you say they're like the extreme of the people who are anti the modernization, want to conserve the ways of the old Japanese culture, and they feel like maybe because of globalization or whatever you'd want to call it, industrialization, that they're slowly losing their culture because of this global market, global culture that we all live in?
I honestly, I don't really follow the politics of like any right wing or nationalist movements. So like even how predominant they are, or how much influence they have, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I've heard of that as being, a part of the politics. Of course, I think that's everywhere you go, you're going to have that kind of movement. But I've never really personally encountered that, or even like have, other than just maybe reading things on the internet about it. I don't know that it has any. I don't know what the ideology is. I do know that there's been a push in the government to amend the Constitution so that Japan can use its military for offensive purposes.
Yeah.
Because right now they're limited to just self-defense. And I've heard that movement is somewhat tied maybe to the right wing or nationalist movements, but like again, I know very little about it. So I don't want to say anything as if I'm
right. You don't want to. I hear you. I totally understand. Yeah, but it is. I mean, obviously, and I'm not going to hold you to the facts of anything because this is all just conversation. But I do find that interesting that like Germany wasn't allowed to have a military at all, to my understanding, and Japan, it sounds like they're still allowed to have a military, just they cannot go out on.
Yeah, I think they have one of the top three military budgets in the world in terms of the amount of money. So they have a really huge, strong military. But yeah, it's only for self-defense. They call them the self-defense force.
Okay, I like it. I mean, that's if I had my way, that's what ours would be for it as well. But
right,
it's but yeah, it is interesting because if you look at their history, especially like pre-World War II, I mean, they were the dominating Asian nation. They
were an empire. I mean, they controlled Korean Peninsula. They controlled lots of China. They controlled parts of Russia. They controlled Taiwan up until World War II. So I think like when I was saying that there's some right-wing nationalist movements that are tied to the wish to amend the Constitution, I think part of the reason is because you still have a lot of land disputes between Japan and some of the other countries. Because after the war, Japan was forced to give up a lot of this land back to Russia or China. So now there's still like land disputes, like, oh, does Korea own this island or does Japan own this island? And so I think maybe some of the push to have the military be more free to operate the way they want is to get maybe some more footholds over these disputed lands. But again, that's just kind of what I've gathered from peripheral of paying attention to the politics here.
Right. No, I know. I know. Well, I'm sure. I mean, it's hard enough. You got two countries that you got to kind of pay attention to. So I'm sure it's not easy to keep up with, especially if the language is different and everything. Like that.
And I don't speak Japanese really, so I'll ask Yuri, sometimes about political questions and stuff. But she's not really that interested in politics, so it's hard to really get too much information from her.
Yeah, and that's probably a thing that definitely is different there and a lot of other countries. It seems like politics here. I talked about this on my last podcast. That when we were kids, you really didn't talk about politics or religion to strangers or even members of your family. I mean, it was just I don't know if I want to use the word shunned upon, but it's not something you really, I mean, you just didn't hear about it. And now it seems like it's almost weird to not put your political opinion out there. Even if you have barely any understanding. I'm talking about Americans, obviously, barely any understanding of politics. You're not pressured to have understanding of politics. And it's almost become like a sports team thing. Like, oh, I'm, let's go Seahawks, let's go Falcons. Like, regardless of what the Falcons or the Seahawks stand for, it doesn't matter. You're just, you're rooting for them regardless of the outcome. So that is a weird thing because, you would always have people who are interested in politics, but it's like now it seems like everybody has to have an opinion, has to have a stance.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing that's really refreshing about being in Japan, actually, is like just from people I've talked to, like there's really little political engagement with the average person here and like what's going on with like the national government or something. I mean,
Yeah.
people, for one, I don't think are that interested, and which maybe isn't a good thing, but it's a nice change of pace from how it is in America.
Yeah.
And also like even if they are interested, like it's not something you talk about in
Yeah.
public with people. It's just like that's your own kind of private opinion. Maybe there's people that will talk to you about it, but like that's not something that usually comes up in a conversation. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
really
probably
nice,
not happened
actually.
often that you've had a Japanese politics discussion at this
No,
point.
and like even when I've asked Japanese people, because like my ability to communicate with the average Japanese person is really limited. But if
Yeah.
I ask my friends, like, oh, do you guys talk about politics with your friends? It's like, no, they
Yeah.
never. That's not something that they talk about ever.
Now for you though, because that's one thing that interests me is like, you and me, we've had tons of political discussions. It's something, regardless of what's going on with politics, it's something that's interesting to talk about. So is that in a way been like you feel like you're missing out on that, or because there's so much other stuff that you kind of explore, it's not really an itch that you need to scratch kind of thing right now?
You mean missing out on the political conversations, or?
Yeah.
No, I don't miss that. I mean, if I want to engage that, it's like you just go on Twitter. And,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I mean, you
you
can
can
just
have
you
that
can
in 2 seconds.
Yeah, with the internet, I guess it does make it easy, but I feel like there's something about that like personal kind of experience. Sometimes, obviously, right now we're all limited on that, but yeah,
I
I
will
mean,
say,
it's
like, I will say, I miss having like conversations with people in America face to face, like going out with friends or that sort of thing, and meeting people. And I feel like it's going to be a long time before I have that experience in Japan, just because my Japanese is so basic at this point.
yeah,
So I miss that aspect of it, but not like exclusively the political angle of it, just the
just the
ability
depth of conversations, essentially.
exactly.
I gotcha, that makes sense. Because yeah, I mean, we've had conversations about religion, everything, and there, again, to your understanding, I know that the language barrier is there, but they're really not. They're not westernized in the religious aspect, right? There's not really
No,
a following of Jesus or Judaism or
no. I mean,
Islam.
there's Christian churches, there's mosques here, but the overwhelming majority, I wouldn't say maybe overwhelming majority, but the majority is agnostic or non-religious. And
Yeah.
then you have like your Buddhist temples, and Japanese religion, I think traditionally is Shintoism, but I don't think that's too popular, or at least it doesn't have much of a public face if it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, religion, from my experience, plays really no role in most people's lives, other than
Yeah.
maybe like going to the temple for New Year's, or going to the temple maybe to meditate on the weekends or something.
Here's a question bringing up New Year's. So obviously Chinese has its own calendar for New Year's, right? They have their own New Year's Day. Now, obviously I know the Japanese and the Chinese have always feuded, and they're like the rivals of the last couple centuries, especially in Asia. They've always been humongous rivals, but I feel like that calendar had to transpose to some other Asian nations, right? Or is it just only China has that and everyone else is on the same page in terms of their timekeeping?
Yeah, like I know Taiwan, which China claims is their own island, but Taiwan, if you consider them independent, they celebrate Chinese New Year. And yeah, other than like China, I don't know of other Asian countries. Japan doesn't follow the Chinese New Year.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, I wonder. Someone who, because I'm into the show Vikings and stuff. I don't know if you know anything about it, watched it,
No, I
whatever. But what's really interesting to me about it is it shows, like, even though Christianity isn't the focus of the show, but it does show like how Christianity somehow, like, it just would not stop in terms of colonizing its culture to the rest of the world. Like, it just was, and it's just so interesting to me, like how something that started out as like a tribe of people, like a very small amount of people, just became such a huge, thing in terms of changing the literal calendar of everybody. I mean, that itself, because regardless of if you're religious or not, we all are aside from China, maybe, the Jewish people, are really all on the same calendar because of Christianity. And that just seems really bizarre, as a person who's not religious, how they could start out from like such a minuscule group of people to like essentially being the timekeepers of the world in a sense, like it's
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think you have similar situation with the rise of Islam, because they also have their own calendar, and even though it's not as probably universally ascribed to as the what is the Gregorian calendar, or
I
is
believe
it?
so. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think obviously like that is going to come down to who has the most economic power in the world, and
Yeah.
that's always going to be what transfuses the culture into other countries. Whoever has like the dominant product, the most money.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is just it's just one of those things that fascinates me, is just because like especially going from paganism, which was everybody pretty much believed in multiple gods. You had the god of thunder. Every religion had the god of everything, had a god, right? The god of wood, the god of the floor, the god of house. It was like different government positions, right? This is
The god of wine.
Yeah. Yeah. So they all had these things, and that was just the norm, right? This was not abnormal. And so I have to imagine like going from that, having like many gods, to say, okay, no, there's only one God, guys. Like that had to be a pretty big sales pitch. Like that had to
Yeah, but I mean, you didn't. If like Christianity, you didn't really have that. It wasn't that severe of a cutting line, because you have all the, well, I don't know if you'd consider the saints gods, but you have these sort of like demigods. You have all the saints, which
yeah.
are kind of considered like higher than normal humans, but maybe not gods. Then you have like angels. Then you have God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. So like in Christianity, it's not quite as severe of a line from paganism to monotheism. Whereas like with Islam, I think you had like much more of a severe change between the pagan, like Arabian religions,
Yeah.
to Islam. Was much more of a drastic change.
Well, what it seems like happened with like the saints, like it seems like, and again, I wasn't there, and I know there's a lot of people that debate this, but from what my understanding is of history and everything like that, is that Christianity in its original form, there were no saints, there was no hierarchy, there was no holidays, even there was no, like, in fact, there's even text in the Bible that I can't name the passage, but something that's pretty clear about not celebrating certain specific days or something like that about the guy. I'm gonna butcher it if I think about it, but something to that extent. And then somewhere along the line, Catholicism emerged, and they created this hierarchy. Okay, well, you're gonna have this guy, he's a little closer to God, and then the guy above him is even closer to God, and then all the way up to the Pope, he's the closest, he actually speaks for God, essentially, right? Whereas a big section, this is where like the Protestants came from, we're like, no, this is not what the Bible is, not about this at all. There should be no hierarchy, there's just God and humans. And it seems like Catholicism is where a lot of that bridge between paganism and Christianity came from, because I think it was like Constantine or whatever, when he was taking power in Rome, you had this feud between the pagans and the Christians still, where they were killing each other, and
Right.
you had essentially two different empires that Constantine's like, we need to unite this into one empire, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to celebrate the winter solstice like the pagans do, but we're going to say it's Jesus Christ's birthday. And that's where all that, it seems like all that came from. Like they did combine the pagan beliefs into the Christian beliefs to create one thing. But I feel like Christianity before that was very anti a lot of that stuff. Like, you're not supposed to, like Jehovah's Witnesses, to me, they seem like they follow the Bible to the letter, almost like an Orthodox Jew or an Orthodox Muslim would, where it's like, no, this is what it says. This is, why don't we do blood transfusions? Well, here's this passage. It says, do not take blood from another mammal, or whatever it says.
Right.
So they seem like the most pure into the, not, again, I'm not a religious, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a theologist, but just from my basic understanding, it seems like there is this as pure as possible understanding of what the Bible is saying. And then Catholicism, baptism, Mormonism, whatever, everything after that is kind of like saying, yeah, but I think what the Bible meant was this. And they're kind of doing their own thing with it.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think even with Christianity from its earliest times, I mean, you have Christians as they practice the religion maybe in Rome. You have Christians as they practice religion in Palestine. It's like every different region that has its own quirks and cultural unique practices.
Yeah.
They're going to practice the religion kind of differently from other areas. So I think even in Christianity, before you had the unification under the Roman Empire, you still had like different churches that might have done things differently according to maybe their own cultural traditions. I think generally that's the case. I don't think you have like one true version of any sort of religion. I think you have the texts, but then you have the different ways people read these texts.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I think you're absolutely right. And you know, the biggest thing is, number one, the Bible was, even if you go back to the first, I don't know, scripture, gospel, whatever, it was written in what, Aramaic, and then translated in Aramaic, then translated into Hebrew, then translated into Greek, then translated into Latin. So this thing has gone through so many and then translated into English. So, you know, there's so many words, you know, because languages are not all structured the same. There's not, like English, for example, there could be like 50 words for one meaning, or there could be one word that there's no other way you can mean it. And same thing goes with, like, you know, Hebrew and all these other things. So it's like Jesus's name, if he did exist, right, if he was an actual person, wouldn't have been Jesus. It would have been like Yeshua or something like that. It wouldn't, or like, you know. So it's just one of those things that we're never I don't think we're ever going to know unless somebody can find the Aramaic, you know, Gospels, and then someone who's a expert in understanding Aramaic actually know what these things are saying. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Wherever they were taught, they're going to adapt those to those cultures to try to hybrid them, whether they're in Arabic areas, whether it's in Greece, whether it's in Rome. And somebody, I forgot what there's something I was watching, I think, where they broke down like the 4 different gospels aren't necessarily 4 different stories, but they're 4 different sales pitches of Christianity to each culture they were aimed at. So like and I'm going to butcher this, but like gospel 1 was aimed at the Greek, gospel 2 was aimed at the Romans, gospel 3 was aimed at, you know, the Palestinians, whatever. And so it's not that there's this like evolution of the story. It's just like, these were all meant for different, you know, people of the world to try to relate to them, to try to sell Christianity to them.
Yeah, I remember I took a biblical literature class in college, and one of the lessons we did was studying the Gospels. And like, if you look at some of the text in between the lines, I forget the exact passage, excuse me, but there's actually points in the Gospels that they almost seem to be taking maybe like digs at the other point of view as expressed in another gospel.
Yeah.
They're not explicitly saying it, but you can kind of see some tension in maybe like the way they express themselves. So they're almost writing maybe indirectly against each other.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, no, I've heard, I mean, I want a copy of each of the Abrahamic religion. I know that everybody in those religions hate being lumped in together, but they really are Abrahamic, you know, whether it's Judaism, Christianity,
they all come
or Islam.
from the tradition of Abraham.
Yeah, so they all are, as far as I'm concerned, it's the what is it, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. So that's but I want all 3 just to kind of see all that and have, because I've always talked about this stuff, but I've only read certain passages of each and haven't been able to just kind of read them and get my own real get my own kind of feeling for them. But
you got to start learning Hebrew, Greek, and Arabic.
Yeah, I got a long ways to go. Something that's I don't know how much time you're working with, but I'm hoping to get at least.
Well, I was gonna ask you if you have a way to edit, because I have to pee really bad.
Oh, you're good, man. Yeah, go pee.
Do you edit this out, or?
I mean, I might just, I don't care. Like, you know, just happens on the Joe Rogan podcast all the time.
You'll have to do you have to do some like juggling for the audience or something. Give me a minute.
Yeah, you're good, man. Back
Okay.
at it.
I'm
Are you
back.
doing the sitting on the floor thing too?
Yeah.
Oh, keeping it nice and dry. All right, all right. Now you're giving me the real submersive
Yeah, man. This
experience.
is how we do it. We don't sit at chairs and tables.
See, with me, man, my legs anytime, like if I'm sitting cross-legged or whatever they call it, for more than like 10 minutes, my feet are falling asleep. So I don't know if that's something you just got to get used to.
Yeah, you never really get used to that. Actually, I'm always suffering that.
I gotcha. But yeah, like what I was interested in, where I wanted to go from here is me and you both have an interesting experience with a background of religion. Like you obviously grew up with I mean, you guys were Christian, or was there a subsect that you guys essentially were?
I mean, fundamental evangelical probably is
Okay.
how I would describe it. And we were non-denominational, so we didn't go to like a Baptist or Catholic or Methodist.
So you don't identify with any of the subsects. It's just, hey, this is, as far
Right.
as
If anything, I would say the churches that I went to growing up were probably more like Baptist leaning, and then as like a teenager, they were probably more like Pentecostal leaning, but they never really ascribed to like a specific denomination.
now, was it, as far as your parents or grandparents, whatever, like the core of the family was this, was it still, regardless of the kind of church it was it still like, hey, we got to go to church every Sunday, people get baptized, like
Yeah, every Sunday, every Wednesday, sometimes one more time, sometimes Bible study on Friday.
Right. So because you did mention, I think you said that theology class or whatever that you took.
Yeah.
Did you take that from your Christian background, or was that that was after that?
No, that was at University of Michigan Dearborn. So that
Okay.
was secular institution.
I got you. So that's way. So it's not like you learned this from, because you did go to like a Christian school, right? Like one of your schools you went to?
Right. I went to a Christian school up until 10th grade.
Did you feel like I mean, I don't know what you'd have to compare it to aside from the people that you hung out with that weren't going to that school, but did you feel like you were getting like a certain biased viewpoint?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I remember in science class, like we were taught that evolution was completely wrong, completely false.
I just figured they'd maybe stay away from evolution. I didn't think that they would just be like flat out trying to disprove it.
Oh no, we were taught, like at Christian school, we were taught the creation story. The Noah's flood was like a historical event. We would have like guest speakers come and like give their evidences and like their arguments for why this was true. Yeah.
Wow.
It was really the way I look at it now is like a really extremist kind of sect of Christianity. Although I think like in America, that's probably the predominant one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, being able to be indoctrinated like from a school, it almost seems like it's like if there was like a private Muslim school here, and I don't know if there's probably some in some states, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it is kind of wild to think about. So because I met you, we were teenagers when I first met you. Now, were you in 10th grade? Were we in 11th grade? Do you remember? Because me and you were the same age.
Yeah, when I met you, I think I had just left the private school. I started going to the public school.
What was that like? Number one, obviously going from private school to public school, whether it's secular to secular or religious based to non-religious based, can be weird, but you basically had it both ways. You had a private school and the religious teachings, and you probably was it the, you have a certain dress code when you were there as well?
Yeah.
So was that, because I remember in well, really all throughout school, whether it was middle school or high school, there would constantly be these debates about, is having a dress code better, because the whole thing, you can't get made fun of for what you're wearing because everyone wears the same thing, that whole kind of thing. You don't have to worry about kids distracting the class because someone's dressed slutty or some dude is sagging their pants. I mean, whatever the case is that they were coming up with. What was your like feeling when you were like, oh, you're going to wear whatever you want kind of thing? Was there a little bit of fear, like, because you've never done that before, or how did that feel at first?
No, I mean, I wasn't like super like socially awkward in that regard or anything. Like I loved the fact that I could go to school in sweatpants if I wanted.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a great change. I welcome that with of my person.
Yeah, no, because when I met you, obviously you didn't. I didn't see like some khakis and button up shirt or anything like that.
No,
That wasn't how
yeah,
you were
no.
at all. So
Yeah, I mean, I can see the point that people would make in terms of maybe wearing a dress code is good discipline for different aspects of the educational purposes or something. I can see that there might be arguments for that would be legitimate, but personally, as a student, I much preferred being able to wear whatever I wanted.
right. Was there what, if anything, was there anything that when you shifted from private school to public school that was like either something that made you nervous, something you didn't like, something that was like a hard adjustment?
Yeah, I mean the hard adjustment was just the fact that like when I started public school, I was starting 11th grade. And so there was already like people had their friends, they already had like their cliques, and so coming from like a school where like my class at the Christian school was 22 kids,
Wow.
and then at the public school I think it's like I don't know 200 or 300 kids or something.
Yeah.
So that was really difficult adjustment, just like breaking out of my shell and not feeling completely like an outsider or like completely different than everyone, and just like trying to make friends. Like I remember like the first day at lunch, like going to find a lunch table.
Yeah.
I ended up sitting by myself, but then I had like a couple other people sit with me, and like I became friends with them. But that was like super uncomfortable,
Oh yeah.
super nerve-wracking.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that is good, because I found this again, not the same experience, and I did move around a lot as a kid, so I kind of got used to the making friends thing. But I remember in 7th grade there was like at least a handful of kids in my grade that were new to school too, that didn't know anybody. So we just became like it was like a super band. When you got a guy from this band, a guy from that band, they all formed like a super band. We were like the super band of kids from different schools, and that was like my first friend group. Like Mo, that's how me and you know each other. He came from a different school. And there was like a few other kids that like we all, which is funny because me and Mo were really out of that group the only ones who stayed friends throughout high school. The rest of them ended up going down their own path and being very, very different, which again is normal, nothing wrong with that. But but you didn't really find that, you didn't get like the random kids that were new there too, and you guys kind of formed an alliance. There wasn't so much.
My best friend at public school was also, he had just came from another school, so he was new, and so that's how him and I kind of connected. Other than that, though, I think the other friends that I made there are just kind of like original people that maybe have their own like socially awkward issues or something. I don't know.
Right. Who was the kid that I met you with originally? It was Alex or something with an A, right?
Alec, yeah. Alec.
Yeah.
He was my best friend. He came from a different junior high school or high school at the time, from like a different district.
I gotcha. So really, when I met you, this is like really fresh, like you into public school essentially.
Yeah, probably like within the first months even.
Wow, that's what. Because you somehow like, how did you? Well, you worked with Mo at Meyer, right?
Right. So I might have known Mo before I transitioned to the public school. But it was like a matter of maybe months, because I started working at Meyer when I turned 16, and then I think it was like that year that I went to public school. So I turned 16 in February. The school year would have ended in June, and then I think I went to public school in September. So I met you that year. It was the same year that I met Mo.
Well, I remember you. I don't know if we picked you up or there's something that happened at Meyer where we had to get you, because the pickup thing that came from him picking you up for work.
Yeah,
or something, right?
that came from the very first time that I went out and like partied with him. And coming from my background, like I never really did partying. And when I went out with him and like got really fucked up that night, I think he had to carry me up like a flight of stairs to like somebody's apartment, and he and somebody else like dropped me, I think once or twice on the way, and they had to pick me up. So the one kid who was with them, Ben, Big Ben, I think.
Probably, yeah.
He didn't know my name, and so he just started calling me Pickup. And then it stuck after that.
Wow. Yeah, Big Ben doesn't really get credited in his nickname capabilities. So I'm pretty sure he came up with a lot of our nicknames.
Yeah.
So I think he's pretty underrated. But that's because I don't think I was there then, but I heard about that story. Because I remember I first met you. I'm pretty sure me and Mo went to Meyer to either just smoke with you. I mean, it was something, I don't think it was a big thing. It was just like a quick kind of thing. And this was long before like rapping and stuff. Like this was way before that, to my understanding. It wasn't,
So wait, the first time that we met, did we take a long drive out to like Mo's like girlfriend's house, or what did we do that night? Because I feel like the first time I met you was probably like one of the very first times I ever smoked pot.
wow, that's an interesting.
But the
It's
very
possible.
first time I was with Mo and I did that, we drove like really far to like New Baltimore. I don't know if you were with us at that time.
Well, I've definitely taken those trips with him, but it's hard for me to remember if it was with you, because I remember picking you up from Meyer, but I remember when we picked you up, it was like nighttime. So it seems weird that we would drive all the way there at night, but it's possible.
No,
I mean,
it was we went out there at nighttime for sure.
wow,
But yeah,
maybe that was it.
yeah, if it was the first time, I probably don't remember that well because of that.
Yeah. Well, no, my memory is like super, super foggy as well. But yeah, that's what's wild is like me and you, like we weren't like super close at that time, but we were in each other's friend group and all that kind of thing. And then like you, like I think Alec threw like a party or a couple parties that we all went to. Those got crazy. The cops came, everybody ran. Like
Yeah, no, I remember one time at your friend, well, he was a mutual friend of ours, probably more your friend because you went to school with him, I think, but Andy, and his like
okay,
broke,
yeah.
and then we all ran out of there, and yeah, that was
that was
crazy.
happening at a lot of parties. It was just, you the cops came, everybody ran.
Somebody sat on his bathroom sink and broke it.
Oh yeah, Andy Baker. Yeah, yeah, that was that's wild. Yeah, because we were probably at a few different things. Even Adam, he actually went to a couple of those parties, but me and him didn't know each other then. And I know you and him definitely didn't know each other then. So it's just, I feel like those parties became like so epic that like everybody from all walks of life, all around Metro Detroit was, started coming to him.
Yeah, felt like that.
Yeah, that is pretty
But
wild.
yeah, I was at that point in my life where, I had just come from the Christian school. And so I was being exposed to all these new worldly temptations. And so honestly, like a lot of those parties, I don't even remember because I was just getting hammered.
Oh yeah, getting crazy. Now, what was your, because I'm trying to think of like, I know at that time I was really experimental, right? And we're well past the statute of limitations, so we can pretty much be pretty open about this, I feel like. But I was getting into cocaine, ecstasy, acid, mushrooms, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, it seems like people, for the most part, again, not a psychology major or anything, but it seems like people either gravitate towards psychedelics, downers, or stimulants. Like I was like cocaine and ecstasy, like those were my favorite things. For you, where did you like gravitate towards that time? Because I know later in life you experiment with other things, but I'm talking about like early teenager when we were in that.
Early teenager, probably like the stimulants, like I don't know. I like psychedelics when they were fun. When they weren't fun, it was like the worst experience in the world. So, I don't know,
Yeah.
I'd probably say downers because I don't like the feeling of being completely out of my mind, which a lot of the times the psychedelics would make me feel like that, and it was just like a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like, because that's one thing that I didn't experience is like being super entrenched from like a religious background like you were in, like, once upon a time, probably everyone you knew had the same religious beliefs. Everyone you talked to, your family, like this was just what the world was. I mean, it was just, so going from that to boom, you're like, it's like the Big Bang, right? Everything explodes and you're in public school. You're meeting all these crazy people. You're going to parties. It's got to be such like a rapid, like there was no gradual, steps for you. It was like one day you're in this Christian kind of bubble and boom, like it's, you're, partying like a rock star and all these crazy things are at your disposal. Like, do you remember being conscious of that at the time, or like what was kind of going through your mind from what you remember?
Yeah. I mean, I remember like, probably if anything, I just realized like, wow, like these people that you're giving like a certain picture or portrait of like the world from the Christian point of view, at least in my experience of my Christian upbringing. And you're given like this view of the world is like super dangerous for your like spiritual health, and then you actually meet people who aren't of the same belief system as you, and you realize like you're really not different. They just have maybe different beliefs than you on certain things, but like your day-to-day life, you have the same kind of thought processes. So it's like, if anything, I just kind of felt more like I could be myself because I wasn't constantly having to mimic what I was told to believe. I don't remember it being like any big shock and awe experience. But
like it wasn't like one
remember,
of those kids who grows up in an Amish community and then does the Rumspringer, and so it wasn't like that for you.
No, it wasn't like that. No. I mean, if anything, I like those sorts of like huge cultural differences between Christian upbringing and then just like secular worldly things like that clashed only with my parents.
Okay.
And that was like the most I don't know, like out of control shocking experience of it, just because we came to like see things in such different ways. But in terms of just like my own personal journey from Christian upbringing to not really believing it anymore, it was probably more gradual than anything.
Yeah, so when does that, because obviously you go from private school to public school, so right away your religious beliefs probably aren't shifting, but do you remember like what the spark was of that? Like what, like when you really were like, okay, why, you really started questioning things? Or
Yeah, I remember just like, I started it was actually probably before I left the Christian school. I had bought this book. I was really interested in philosophy, and that came from they actually had a desire to defend Christianity from like outside arguments, because I remember like at the time AOL was like really popular. You would go in like chat rooms and you'd like talk to people, and I remember as like going to church and being a Christian, I would go into the chat rooms and like try to debate people about believing in God. And I was probably like 13 years old at the time or something, And so people would give me arguments that I didn't really know how to refute. I didn't know the answer to them. So I remember I bought this atheism book, and that actually like kind of opened the door to me, like kind of being open to the ideas that maybe it's not true. But this was all before I left the Christian school. This was like maybe when I was 13 or 14.
Okay.
And my parents actually ended up taking that book from me. They didn't want me to read it because they thought it was like having a bad influence on my like attitude or something.
Gotcha.
But so that was kind of like the seeds that were planted. And then later in my life, when I started like maybe developing my own opinions, like I always had those seeds of doubt kind of there. And I remember like when I first like really seriously kind of doubted, and I went through phases where I would doubt and then I'd come back and believe, and then I'd doubt again, then I'd come back and believe. But I remember like one of the first like maybe times that would become a permanent doubt was like I remember asking my youth pastor at the church like all these questions, and he basically just said like he didn't know the answer, you just have to believe it. And to me that was like so unsatisfying. I couldn't just believe it.
No, that's that's pretty wild. So but do you think, because you're naturally a inquisitive person, you're naturally curious, it seems like, I mean, I don't think you'd be in Japan and the other side of the planet right now if that wasn't who you were. But do you ever like wonder like, what if I never left the Christian school? Do you feel like where you're at now was inevitable, or do you feel like that was a key moment in your youth where if that didn't happen, then you may have ended up on a whole different trajectory?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'm sure like there's probably like 1,000 different choices that every single person, every individual makes, that your whole life could be different if you would have done it just a little. But yeah, at the time, you have no idea that these decisions have such consequence. So yeah, I mean, I think definitely like the way I look at it is that life is just a series of accidents. And everything that's going to happen from now until the time you die is going to change based on these little decisions that at the time don't seem like of any meaning.
Yeah, very inconsequential.
But yeah, totally. If I would have not left the Christian school, my life probably would be totally different.
Did your parents, or at least I don't know who's more, strict on the religion, your dad or your mom, but did they ever, like, once they saw kind of who you were becoming? Were they ever like throwing in your face like we should have never took you out of that school, that kind of thing?
They
Like,
never said that, but I'm sure they questioned a lot of their decisions. I mean, as somebody just looking at it from their point of view, it'd be impossible for me to imagine them not questioning those kinds of things.
yeah, now because you're the youngest out of your three brothers, right?
Yeah.
Were you did the I think Jay and Steve are your other brothers, right?
Yeah.
Did they fully stay in Christian school their whole, development K through 12?
My oldest brother Jay did. He graduated from there, and then my other brother Steve, he got kicked out of there in, I want to say, like maybe 10th grade or
Oh wow.
11th grade or something. So he ended up going to public school the last couple of years of high school as well.
But it seems like, if I'm not mistaken, Jay did not, and he parted from the religious, bubble as well, and Steve didn't, right? Steve is still, or is, religious to some extent.
I'm not so sure with Steve. I mean, like he's told me at different times that he didn't believe it, but then he might have changed his mind. I'm not really sure what his
Okay.
beliefs are at this point, but I mean, whatever his beliefs are, like he's pretty open to like other people's point of view. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not like I would consider my parents to be pretty stuck in their religious view. Like they're not really open to hearing other sides. And I would say Steve is probably more open than that.
Do you feel like the newest generation of religious people are more open to having those conversations and maybe more polished, and their swords of debate?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look at like Christianity, like over the last 40-50 years, I think it's changed a lot in America.
Yeah.
I mean, like you had like the religious right in the 1980s, which, I mean, I'm just speaking from somebody who's read about it. I wasn't growing up in the 80s, but
Yeah.
you still have that sort of religious fundamentalism, but I definitely think you have a lot less concern for, maybe the issues have changed. Maybe like, like homosexuality was something that the religious right was extremely against. And I don't think that's that big of a problem for a lot of younger Christians. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been in the church for 15 years. So maybe
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah. So you're super far away from it. Yeah. My next podcast, I believe it's going to be one of the next ones. I don't know if I told you about this, but I'm going to have 3 missionaries from the Church of Latter-day Saints. So that's going to be interesting. And, and I'm always going to be respectful of everyone's viewpoint. I mean, I told them from the beginning, because I don't want anybody thinking, not understanding like who I am, or feel like they're being in a trap, especially if something's being recorded. So I was very open with them. I said, because I don't identify as an atheist, because I don't know if I am an atheist anymore, but I'm definitely like, I think I swing back and forth between atheism and being agnostic. I definitely am not religious in the man-made, the religions that have all been cataloged, because I think that if there is some type of God, there's no way that a human being could have would have the understanding what that is, so I just don't think, and that's really my thoughts on it. But basically I told them, I was like, this is where I am, so I don't want you guys going into it thinking that I'm someone else. I understand that your whole thing, your mission is probably to, and again, I hate to use the term sell Christianity or whatever, but you're basically, you're trying to spread the word. You're trying to convince somebody. Probably not going to happen with me, but if you want to have that conversation, I definitely want to have the conversation. I want to ask questions.
Yeah,
so
that sounds interesting. Have you been doing any like preparation or like reading up on Mormonism to prepare for that?
Well, I'm probably going to do a little bit. I mean, it's funny because I didn't know for sure. I mean, the way they looked, they kind of stereotypically look like Mormons, but I was like, I don't want to, assume that they're Mormons. So what I did was I asked them, I said, for your intro, just like I introduced you and anybody else who's on the show, so I have some information, what, specific religion are you representing? Is there a specific church that you want me to say that you guys work for? Anything like that? How do you want me to introduce you? And they basically explained to me, hey, we're we work for the, or whatever, Church of the Latter-day Saints, and you don't say, they told me all their first names, but they're like, we don't want to be introduced by our first names. They call themselves elders. So it's like elder and then their last name. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, no, I'll probably, like, I heard of all the stereotypes, and I knew one of my friends, I don't think you ever met him, but his name was Brandon, and his mom is Mormon to this day. And so, he told me about all this stuff, the different planet stuff, the planet collab and all this stuff. So that's going to be interesting, because I feel like they're almost like a hybrid. And again, I feel like anybody who's in a religion would be offended by me trying to have this, understanding of it. But I'm hoping that if you're going to have this conversation, you won't be. But it almost seems like they're almost like a hybrid of like Scientology and like Christianity almost. Like it's like, even though they came out before Scientology, but it's just, it's interesting that they have this like intergalactic kind of, story. It's not just, so that's something that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, man, I appreciate you. It's definitely been good talking to you. I appreciate you coming on. Always good conversation. One thing I did want to show you, because I know that you really haven't, we talked about marijuana, we've talked about different things. But I know that, as you know, Michigan has legalized marijuana, right? So for me, it was a huge thing to actually go into one of these stores, right, and have that experience. And I wanted to show you, because it was always a fantasy of mine to be able to buy a pack of joints like you buy a pack of cigarettes. And so this is what this looks like. Yeah, it's got like a Surgeon General warning and everything on the back. I mean, it's so pretty cool.
How many doobies come in that?
This is 3, and they're expensive, man. This with tax, with 3 joints, was $65.
Wow.
Yeah, so pretty expensive, and you don't have to buy them like that. You can buy just the buds and stuff like that. But for me, it was like, I want the experience. I'm not a big smoker anymore, very casual.
Yeah.
But it was for New Year's. I was like, it's been a crazy year.
Have you smoked them yet, or?
I smoked them.
How is it?
Well, I picked, because I'm very casual of a smoker, I picked the lowest potency. This one was 13%, which again, when I was in the store, I told the lady this. I was like, when I was smoking, we never knew what the potency was. So I have nothing really to compare this to, but I'm going to assume the lowest potency is something I'll be able to somewhat, maintain. And I was drinking. I made sure I was drinking first, because I have to have like the alcohol to coat it a little bit, if you know what I mean. I'm sure you know what I mean, because I know that you've been a casual smoker.
I can't do it anymore, man. I don't know if it's just my body or the weed just got too good, but like the last couple of times I've smoked, I've just been a disaster.
Oh, it blows you away. I mean, it's
I can't handle it.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. So I had to make sure it was the lowest potency. I got, drunk first. But yeah, no, I still felt it, but I was able, my alcohol, like I felt the alcohol and the weed at war with each other a little bit.
That's a problem for me. I can't do I can't combine them anymore.
Yeah.
But even just smoking, man, like, did you have your heart race? Did you get nervous? Because that happens to me every time now.
I got a little nervous, but I don't know if it was me psyching myself out, because like I used to, like the last time I've smoked where I just smoked weed, I didn't have anything mixed with it. You start getting that paranoid and these weird thoughts in your head. So I started thinking about stuff, but I still was able to put myself in the driver's seat and say, you know what, this is, you're just putting this on yourself because you think you're supposed to think this way. And I was able to kind of maneuver out of it. But I think the alcohol helped, because the alcohol is almost like a confidence boost, and the weed is like not. The weed is like very humbling. So it's like it was like my personalities were like, which one's which. But
I had conversations in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. But I had a good time. I mean, I had a buddy over, and because it came with 3 joints, and obviously because of the COVID stuff, I gave him one. I had one, and I still have one left that's in there, and maybe that'll be for a rainy day or something. But yeah, I mean, I basically, and I didn't smoke it all in one sitting. Like I lit it up, took like a couple hits, and it stayed lit too. It was like good, like almost like a, having the conversation with a cigarette or a cigar. So I would take a few hits. When I started feeling it, I'd put it out, drink, have more conversations, boom, have that urge for a cigarette, because I don't really smoke cigarettes anymore. All right, light it up, take a couple hits. you know, that kind of thing. So I smoked it very, very casual. I was not taking a whole joint to the head.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, not a bad experience. It's just, again, it's not something that, because I feel like if I did smoke that without alcohol, I would be high for at least like 3 hours. I mean, it just, again, not something that I'm going to be doing on a regular basis, but it's nice. It's something that I wanted to experience. I never had went in the stores before.
And what's that like? Do you still have to go down to like 8 Mile to go to
No,
like a...
Hazel Park has 2 of them.
Okay.
Right across the street. It has Breeze and it has a New Standard, which is where I went. Breeze right now is only doing deliveries, and you go there, they'll bring it out to you. But I was like, you know what? I want the in-store experience. So New Standard was letting people in, but only like select people. And you go, this place looks like a fancy nightclub or jewelry store. I mean, you go inside, I'll send you a picture. I mean, it looks like you're in the Apple store. Some very pristine marble floors, glass everywhere, glass showcases. The people who work there are following you around with an iPad to like present different things, give you different information. I mean, you know, the stereotype of how I remember like BDTs or the Jungle Room, you know, with the tie-dye everywhere and the hippie stuff. Like that was not like it, like you could tell that at least for New Standard, this is a market for people who are like not the typical smoker, or if they are, they're like more like, hey, we don't want that. We don't want to be in that like hippie realm or so. I don't know, but it just it totally like blew my mind. Like I was super nervous because obviously I remember the BDT days and you couldn't say what things were, right? So instead of a bong, you have to say a tobacco pipe. And it's like, yeah, let me get this 6-foot tobacco pipe. You know, like
Right.
So I was super nervous, but they know it's almost like and I'm sure they know people whose first time is going in there are nervous, and they try to make you feel as comfortable as possible. I mean, it was funny because when you first go in, there's a receptionist and she gets your info. You know, and I think the info was only for the COVID stuff. Basically, you're signing a thing saying, I don't have a cough, I don't have a fever. So I don't know if you even have to sign in normally. And she was like super friendly, like, you know, welcome. Is this your first time? Oh, that's awesome. You know, hey, would you like a membership? Would you like to be notified on specials? And I just got paranoid. I was like, I don't really want my name on a list right now.
Yeah, right.
But no, they were super friendly, and they know that a lot of people it's their first time with it. They know it's people's first time with being in a store that has all these details. I mean, sativa, indica, hybrid. I mean, they had it was like,
not to mention they probably have like drinks, candies, baked goods.
Oh yeah, I was only in one because I basically told her what the person who was working with me, like what I was looking for, and there was like 5 different I don't know, displays. So we only went to one display for what I was looking for, and there was so many different things on that one display to choose from. And it was just like, I was like, man, I was just so overwhelmed. It was just so crazy. But yeah, I was like, you know what? I want a package. They don't have as many joint pre-roll packs as they call them. They only had like a couple options. This was actually the cheaper one. There was one with 5 joints that was like $100.
Okay. Are they pretty big, or are they like?
I'll show you because I have one left. So this thing has a cool little button thing that you press and it slides out. So apparently there's a half smoked one that my buddy had, but this is
okay. That's pretty good size.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely want to save that for when you're ready to download RPG Maker MV Player on your Nintendo Switch. Download King of Neandria and then light that up. Yeah, you'll have a good time.
That's a good plug, man. I appreciate it.
That's like good 3 or 4 hours. You can just sit back, relax.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't have the focus thing when I'm high, so for me it would be like I would start playing it and I'd be like, what am I even supposed to be doing right now? Like I think the Game Maker was a game itself, and I'd be wilding out, man.
Well, yeah, man, it's been good talking to you. It's been good catching up.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, we'll have to be in touch, and yeah, I mean, I'll definitely.
How often are you doing podcasts?
Well, right now I have a week off work, so I'm gonna try to get a few in this week, and after that, at least once a week, I'd like to record one. because I don't really have a set schedule right now with the podcast thing, I'm just going to try to really, my whole thing is trying to get as much content out as possible. And then also, you know, I'm promoting my album that I'm about to drop coming out. So I'm trying to do a few different things, have a few different, you know, series of content and stuff like that. So eventually I probably will for this have like a schedule, but right now I just want to, you know, get as much stuff out as I can. And the good thing about, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You first, man.
Okay, so your podcast, the name of it, so it's focused as mostly on politics, or like what's
well, I named it Party and Politics, and we covered it, which was funny, interesting enough, as we talked about party and politics a lot. I mean, obviously it started out gaming, but because my whole thing is, I don't know if I told you about the first podcast I started, which was Unsigned Cast, which is more focused on just like rappers who are unsigned. You know, I used to say, you know, Unsigned Cast, the podcast about rappers that never made it. Well, one, I think a lot of people that I would talk to on there kind of sounds offensive. And I didn't mean it that way. I just thought it was a cool tagline. But also you're constricted. The conversation, I felt myself a few times having to constrict the conversation to be like, you know, I only want to talk about this topic because that's what I'm saying the podcast is, where it's like, you know, maybe I'll continue that to some capacity, but I really want to have something with free-form conversation, just like us. I mean, we were able to talk about gaming. We went into Japanese call. I mean, we've covered so many different topics. I don't want to feel constricted. So I feel like calling something party and politics, which are two things that are so far away from each other, you know, I can pretty much cover everything in a conversation. I don't have to feel like I'm out of the realm with it.
Right. No, that's cool. I look forward to hearing your conversation with the Mormons. That would be interesting for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited about it, and yeah, I'm gonna keep going on. I sent Adam an invite. I'm gonna, you know, I'm waiting on a reply for it, but you know, me and him have been in talks and stuff, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I love this. You know, you know me, I've always been a big conversationalist, so
yeah.
I figured why not record them and put them out and maybe make money off them in some regard or something at some point. So.
This is your second episode?
This is number 2, yeah.
All right, well, that's pretty good. I mean, I won't take too much offense that I'm number 2 and not number 1, but it's cool.
Yeah, you're getting in the ground floor, man.
Right on.
All right, man. Well, take it easy. Have a good
yeah, have a good night. It's like 12:30 over there.
Well, it's almost good morning for me at this point, but yeah. Good afternoon, man. And yeah, we'll be in touch, and probably, like I said, we'll probably do another one at some point. So
sounds good, man. Enjoy your night.
You as well, man. Later.
All right, later.